Okay, so let me go ahead and get started tonight. Again, I'm your instructor, Randy Kearns, and tonight we want to go over results and conclusions. I also have made active the last 2 weeks worth of assignments so that we can talk about them as well. The and because we've wound up condensing a week, I've wound up having to stagger the final assignment to the middle of next week. So let's talk about it. And I've included a schedule just to be sure that we're all on the same page. Remaining dates: tonight is our Zoom class. May the 2nd, which is next Sunday night, the results and conclusions are due. Now, if you want feedback, if you want to receive feedback, then go ahead and submit that. You can skip it, and I'll assign a grade for that assignment based on your final submission. But I would just encourage you, if you're in a good position that you can go ahead and submit it, then I would encourage you to go ahead and submit it. And then a week from tonight is our last night in class together. And a week from tonight, you will need to present your question again. Now, if you recall, sorry, somebody needs to come in. So if you'll recall, the first night we submitted and we presented our questions, I reminded most of you that that's a good starting point. However, I do think by the time you get to the end of this, you will wind up needing to narrow this down. And I think by now, you get it. You understand what I'm talking about when I say it has to be narrow and manageable and something you can research. It needs to be doable. Again, from day one, everyone has suggested and had good ideas of what they wanted to research and what they wanted to present. My challenge to each of you along the way has generally been, or generally dealt with, where are you going to find data for that, and how are you going to research that? So as I start, or as I continue working through the methods that have been submitted, I hope to have all of the grading caught up by tomorrow night. But again, as far as our dates go for the remaining parts of our class, we have our class tonight online, which is the 27th. Then next Sunday night, results and conclusions are due. You can skip that, and I'll give you a grade based on your final paper, but I would encourage you to submit if you have it. Next Tuesday night, you will do your final presentation in class. If you can't do your final presentation in class, you'll need to do what you've done before, and that's record it and send me a link on YouTube of where you've uploaded it, or there's a couple of other ways you can send me the video, but you'll need to record the video of your presentation and send that to me. May the 6th, which is next Thursday night a week, the last of the small parts of your paper will be due, and that is your title page, your table of contents, your abstract, and your references. Now, tonight I'm actually going to go over both presentations. The first presentation I want to go over is results and conclusion, and the second presentation I want to go over deals with title page, table of contents, abstract, and references. That is due next Thursday, May the 6th. And then that should give you some feedback for your final submission, which will be due May the 13th. So again, if you're overwhelmed by some of this, you can work on the paper and spend time working on the paper and just submit one final paper. Just that may not give you your best grade. And so I'm trying to be sure that you have an opportunity to get feedback and to improve your work before the final submission, so that when the final submission comes, there's no surprises. So anyway, let's go ahead and since I've gone over that, now let me go ahead and do the presentation for results and conclusions. I will ask at this point, do you have any questions about anything so far? Okay, so let me go ahead and put this into presentation mode, and let me drag this over here, and then let me change the screen I'm sharing from that one to that one. Okay, and so let's go ahead and start talking about results and conclusions. Again, just as a reminder, we're writing a 5-chapter paper. Each of the chapters need to be, there's a hard page break between each of the chapters. And tonight we're going to talk primarily about chapter 4 and chapter 5. Chapter 4 is the results and discussion and limitations, and chapter 5 is the conclusions. And again, this is just a little bit more of the details of what those parts of the manuscript are. So let's talk just a little bit about the results. Results are really your principal findings. What did you, so the methods tell me step by step how I get from point A to point B. The results tell me what you found when you arrived at step B. Now, many of you started with a really a global perspective, a much larger perspective. You may have wanted to look at something that was, a national theme or but the point is, it was something that it's unlikely to find that amount of data that you want to analyze, and besides, it can be pretty cumbersome to try and analyze it. So what you may have found may have dealt with, St. Tammany Parish as an example, and then so that becomes your methods, or tell me what you found and how you analyze those data. And then your results are what was your analysis of those data. And your limitations will be, it directly reflects the community you looked at, and that would be St. Tammany Parish. But the limitations of that also tell you that it may or may not reflect what's going on in Orleans Parish or Jefferson Parish. But it does establish a basis to ask more questions in those locations. And so, again, a part of the results include just the black and white numbers. What did you find? Those are the results. And then a discussion includes how what you found applies to the community that you looked at. If you looked at the state of Louisiana, how does what you measured, how does what you found as a part of your results? In your discussion, how does that apply to the state of Louisiana? And then the limitations would be, while it may apply to the state of Louisiana, it may or may not apply to other states. Because you looked at an entire state's worth of data, you may also have some limitations in how those data are viewed in smaller communities. In some communities, it may be much better than the circumstance that you identified. In some communities, it may be much worse, because when you're measuring the mean or the median of certain data that are statewide, it's very difficult in aggregate to go back and look at specific parishes. Some may be impoverished, some may be quite wealthy and have a lot of resources. And so the ones that are quite wealthy and have a lot of resources are far less likely to have some of the same health constraints that you find in poorer communities that are more likely to be impoverished. But that's how your results, and then your discussion, and then understanding your limitations, that's how that information plays out in your paper. It's really a big part of your paper, but it's not, it's an important part of your paper, but it's not a very long piece of your paper, so to speak. And again, the structure of the results, really, you just want to talk about what you found, but then the emphasis is really on the discussion. You know, how do you understand, what do you understand from what you determine from those data, from your analysis of those data? And does that impact how you look at things? And again, let that drive into the limitations part. You know, again, the function of the discussion and the limitations is it helps us understand the why, what's going on, the meaning behind the data that you used. You know, so again, I talk about my methods may give me a step-by-step process to get from New Orleans to Covington, and those that may be my methods. My results is I got to Covington. And the limitations are, and the discussion is, okay, so what? Why does it matter that you can get to Covington? Well, it matters because before 1974, it was a lot harder to drive to Covington from New Orleans. Before the highway opened. And so again, it's a part of the methods lead to results. The results lead to discussion, and discussion leads to limitations. You know, the limitations, again, if I'm talking about that step-by-step process I took to drive to Covington, the limitations are, it may not, it obviously doesn't apply to other parts of the state, but it helps us understand that before 1974, you couldn't get to the other side of the lake without driving around the lake. And so if there are other bodies of water where there are large population bases that need to be connected, the importance of funding a bridge may be there. And so, you know, again, the whole point is to connect the results back to the methods, and then also talk about how you discuss that and what the limitations are and what you found. What else do we want to talk about? I do include some information on the difference between the discussion and the background. The background really gives us a history of why this was important. The discussion really talks specifically about your results. So while you can loop back to your opening statements in your paper, it primarily needs to focus on the results. What were your results? And again, discuss the relevance of it, and also discuss in the context of the limitations of it. Yeah, what else do I want? One big piece about doing any research project is what's new. What did you find that no one else had written about or no one else had talked about? And so a part of this also is how are you contributing to expand the body of knowledge? You know, again, in one semester and a bachelor's level research project, we're typically not going to be seen as with the intent of expanding the body of knowledge, but the more your academic career may progress, the more you may wind up doing more of this writing, and certainly could contribute to again, academic research and the more your research gets published, the more people look to you for certain decision making of what needs to be done or how things need to be done. It can help you develop your expertise. It can help you develop maybe a niche so that you become more employable in certain circumstances. So there are a lot of opportunities that can come out of it. The first thing that has to come out of this project, though, is just the understanding of how the process works. Another part of this is interpretation. You know, what do the numbers mean? And that's in your discussion. Again, you find the numbers, you find the results. Well, what does that mean? That really, interpreting the information is really the big part of the discussion here. And then the implications really lead us into the limitations. You know, and the limitations are, again, constrained by the area that you looked at, and that's okay. It really is okay. And in fact, more than once, I've looked at academic papers at a higher level, at a master's level or at a doctorate level, and I've reminded people, you're trying to do too much. You need to, some of the same conversations I've had with many of you. You know, that's a really interesting topic, but it's really too broad, and we need to start thinking about how we narrow it down. Now, several of you had a couple of good ideas as it related to primary data. Just understand, we were over a semester, it's very difficult to start a research project that includes an institutional review board review and approval for primary data. So that's why I kept reminding many of you, we need to look for secondary data. Secondary data is important. We don't have to get an IRB for it. It's already been collected. We're just going to use it now for our research. And so this kind of takes us into the conclusion. The conclusion is really the shortest part of the paper. The conclusion is kind of a summary of the discussion. What did you conclude? Typically, the conclusion is no more than a paragraph. At most, it may be 2 paragraphs, but it's really that ultimate takeaway message. You know, again, summarize the findings. Don't make sweeping statements. Stay specific to your target. You know, what did you learn from this, and what can others learn from reading your work? And, you know, really the bottom line is the so what and who cares. When you're writing your conclusion, bear in mind, if someone said so what or who cares, can you answer those 2 questions with your conclusion? Hopefully you can. The aim is to answer the so what and who cares with a good conclusion. And that pretty much wraps up the session for results and conclusions. Let me stop at this point and ask, are there any questions for results and conclusions? And if not, I'm going to go ahead at this point and pivot to, let's see, to this presentation. And this is focused on the smaller pieces of your presentation, or the smaller pieces of your paper. All of these smaller pieces, in fact, looking at several papers that have been submitted over the last couple of weeks, several of you have already started on or have already at least created a draft version of this. And the whole point to this is to help you kind of nail down exactly how it should look. And so, you know, the point to this part of the presentation is to cover these last couple of pieces. So let's go ahead and move into that and talk about that. So the abstract, let's start with the abstract. The abstract is really the first part that's read. There's actually a couple of pieces in front of it, the title page and the table of contents. I'll talk about those in a minute. But really the last thing that you're going to write that includes a couple of paragraphs will be the abstract. And the abstract is really the last thing that you write. After you finish your conclusion, that's a good time to go back. Now, some of you have already drafted at least an idea of what you want your abstract to look like, and that's okay. But I will always remind you that the abstract needs to be the last piece that you edit, and it needs to reflect, again, kind of an overview of what your paper looks like. You know, if I pick up a paper that's 25 pages, you know, the abstract tells me why I want to spend the time to read 25 pages. If it's a good abstract, it will capture my attention and hold my attention even as I get to pieces of the paper that I don't necessarily want to read. On the other hand, I've seen very good papers spoiled by a really lousy abstract. So spend a little bit of time on the abstract. That really should be the piece that captures your reader and tells your reader why this is important. You know, the abstract summarizes the paper, again, gives somebody a first impression. More than anything else, the one piece that's read about your paper before anything else is read is the abstract. We'll talk about how it should be organized and the standard settings for it in just a minute. There are a couple of ways to write an abstract. There's only one way that we're going to write one for this particular type of paper. I have given you some additional information so that if you wind up in a different academic environment at some point and somebody tells you to write an abstract, you need to have a better feel for what the abstract format should look like. And I've said this before, again, it needs to be carefully revised. If there's journal articles, sometimes it's important to introduce them. It's not a big deal. The big deal is the reader about the article's comment, the content. And again, the idea is to persuade your reader that they want to read what you've written. It does help you kind of distill down complex information. And again, from a writing standpoint, it's always helped me read other abstracts more effectively too. But it helps you with, once you feel comfortable writing the abstract, I think you'll feel a little bit more comfortable about the research process, because that's really the point where you're kind of putting a bow on completing your own work. A well-developed abstract is typically 200 to 300 words. It's short, it's concise, it is a basic overview and gives me an idea of what's going on in the paper. There's no new information in the abstract that you won't read in the paper. Just in brevity is how it's found in the abstract. Let's see, what else do we want to be sure and talk about? Yeah, key pieces of the abstract. Again, we're writing a narrative, what's called a narrative abstract, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and move on to this page. Again, just a couple of sentences that introduce what's going on, a couple of sentences that describe your research methods, a couple of sentences that talks about the results, and maybe discussion or limitations, and then a couple of sentences about your conclusion and recommendations if you have them. You need to think about words that connect your abstract so that, again, it reads pretty quickly and pretty easily. 200 words is not a lot of words. So again, but somewhere between 200 and 300 words really takes us into, this is an example of a narrative abstract, and this is exactly what we're doing. Here's an image of what the narrative abstract looks like. The one thing that's different, this is actually from an APA 6th edition that includes the running head. For our work, we no longer need a running head for a student paper. So if you include one, I'm not going to deduct for it. Just understand the 7th edition now of APA writing style no longer requires a running head. The rest of it is what an abstract should look like. And this particular guide told us no more than 250 words. Again, the 200 to 300 words is really the typical limit. And if you want to include some keywords, that will be important later on in academic writing. I'm not going to grade your paper whether you did include them or did not include them. So not a big deal to me, but it could be a big deal later on if you're going to write again for a master's thesis or for that matter some of the papers that are due in a master's program. Probably the one thing is it's double spaced. It does have a heading, abstract. It's not indented, and this is its own page. So it does have its own page, and then we separate this page from the start of the paper. I've included this as an example so that if later on someone tells you in your career, I need you to do a scientific abstract for this project. This is what a scientific abstract looks like. It's more than 250 words. They're typically closer to about 675 to 850 words. And they actually include structural components. I'm accustomed to introduction, methods, results, conclusion, and the one other piece that I'm used to seeing in scientific abstracts is application of findings to the science. In other words, the who cares is included in the scientific abstract. But if you're writing a scientific abstract for a scientific journal, they will tell you what format they're looking for. And in many cases, you'll wind up with specific blocks to put each of these sections into. But again, for our work, we're not doing this. I'm only including this as an example so that if someone tells you later, I need you to put together an abstract for a scientific paper, that's what they're talking about. An abstract for an academic paper is typically a narrative abstract. And as you did your research with PubMed, you probably found both types of abstracts. Anyway, I felt like that was important to be sure and discuss. So let's talk about some of the other pieces as well. Again, they're small details, but they're important details. And that's the title page and table of contents. So let's start with the title page. One thing that is important to remember is what are the pieces that should be on a student paper. And there is a slight difference between a student paper and a professional paper. Those intended for scholarly publication have an additional amount of formatting to them. I didn't include that, but I did want to be sure that that was noted here. Another part of the title page is kind of moving through the details, and I've got a visual example of this in just a minute. The author's note is, again, kind of the big thing that's changed between 6th and 7th edition of the APA standards. You should not include an author's note. The other thing you don't have to include is the running head. Again, the running head has been something that's been an important part of APA papers in the past, but is no longer an important part of the 7th edition APA. And so this is a sample title page for a student paper. What's the title of the work? What's your name? what's the program you're in, what's the name of the course. Um, I'm Dr. Randy Kearns, and then the date is whatever date you turn this in. The other thing to note that we used to spend a lot of time over and is the page number here. Go ahead and put a page number in the upper left-hand corner of every page, 1 through whatever. And you'll wind up with more than 25 pages, but it gives you an idea of exactly where things are. Historically, we have broken this up into small Roman numerals, and anyway, earlier editions of the APA standard, and if you see some earlier paper examples, you may see some of that. Again, the 7th edition APA standard is just start out with a Arabic number 1, and we move through the end of it. We will include a table of contents for this assignment. There's not an APA requirement for a table of contents, but a lot of college papers require a table of contents. It's not hard to do, so I went ahead and threw that in as a part of the assignment. And again, just to help you understand that each of these sections should be broken apart. And this is what it looks like. And the reason I know immediately that this one is kind of an older version, if I know my title page is going to be page 1, there's no way the abstract can be page 1. So again, this is kind of an older version, but it does reflect it reflects what we're doing for this work. It needs to be title, table of contents, write the abstract, where you find it, what's the introduction, where you find it, the methods, where you find it. I don't know that you include participants and materials and procedures. You do need to include your literature review, which is a part of this work, and your results, which is, again, not included in this example. And then if your limitations or your discussion starts on another page, I would include that as well in your conclusion and your references. If you have appendices that you attach at the end, then include those. If you have tables that you've inserted into the document, then you may want to identify them as well. So I've included the APA standard on how to insert your references. This is material that we've gone over before, but rather than telling you to go back and look at something we went over before, I went ahead and added in just a handful of slides as it relates to references for APA style. About the only thing that, you know, in most cases, most of you are pretty close to it. Just don't cut and paste the hypertext URL link into your references and say, I've done it. That's not acceptable. Be sure it's in the format of author's last name and then first and middle initials, and then name of the article and name of the journal that it's in. And again, I've got how this should be. The references should be double spaced. They're placed in a hanging indent, and I've got an image of that here in just a minute. Again, these are the basic rules for most sources. I'm not going to be terribly strict on this, but get it close. You know, again, please don't do a cut and paste of what the hypertext link is. Tell me what the name of the article is in some reasonable format that's pretty close to this. What else do we need to talk about? So here's an example of the sample reference page. Again, it's a hard page break that separates conclusion, ends on one page. The next page is references. And and references should be centered and bolded over the page references. And then all of your citations, all of your references should be listed in alphabetical order. Again, that's kind of a big deal in APA. If you're writing in other formats, I know of other formats that don't use alphabetical order, but it starts with the first author, and again, all of the citation is done in what's called a hanging indent. I think you understand what a hanging indent is. If you have any question with it, again, please let me know. But everything is double spaced. And then I've also included just a couple of examples for figures. And so if you're going to use figures or tables and insert it in the content, that's okay. If you're, as an example, if I have a series of numbers that I want to show that's a part of my results, I can include a series of numbers in my results, and I need to show that in either a figure style or this is a table style, and that's a perfectly good way to show that information. Now, if the difference between sample figures or sample tables, these are numbers that help me explain directly what I did in my results section. If I've got an example of, in this particular case, they're talking about the National Cancer and the American Cancer Society, and the note from this year's World Malaria Report at a glance. If I wanted to include something about the World Malaria Report, I would put that at the end of the paper as an appendix. Again, I don't know that I would do that. That just makes things a little bit more complicated. But if you need to put something like a map that shows a particular area that you reviewed, you can include that as an appendix. An appendix goes at the end of the paper after the references. But if you have specific numbers that you used in your results section, they can go in the results and they need to be shown in this format. And that really takes us to a conclusion. So with that, let me stop and let me go back to
Can you say the last part with the number? So that's just like if we have a table, right? Not like we have to have a table.
No, you do not have to have a table, but if you have numbers that you want to include them and you want to show them in a table format, that would be the format that you would use them. But no, okay, you do not have to have a table, and no, you do not have to have an appendix. Are there other questions? So let me go back over the remaining dates one more time, just to be sure that we're clear on this. And again, just to be sure that if you have any questions, please let me know. The thing coming up Sunday night will be the results and conclusions that are due. I would encourage you to submit it if you have it. I can give you some feedback before you submit your final paper. If you don't have it, you're swamped, you're still trying to pull some other pieces together, you can skip through it. And whenever I grade your final paper, I'll put a grade in that assignment for that particular part of your paper. But you know, I don't, each of you are at, some of you are well ahead of the game, and you've written a very good paper and you're in good shape. And some of you have struggled, and it, you know, for all sorts of reasons. Some of you have 1,000 things going on in your life. And so, you know, what I'm trying to do is to be sure that you have options that are available to you that I can work with you on. And so we have some flexibility between now and May the 13th, but really when we get to May the 13th, we're pretty much out of time. And so that's why I'm trying to be sure that the results and conclusions, if you want some feedback, put it in there by May the 2nd, I'll get you some feedback. May the 4th, a week from tonight, we will meet in class and you will present your question again in what should be a more narrow view of what you actually pared it down to. As I mentioned the first night, you presented your question. In most cases, what it will look like next Tuesday night will be a much more focused, a much more narrow view. And so that's what we'll do next Tuesday night. I've got a sample slide presentation that you can use. Just make some edits to it, put your numbers in there, change the date or whatever, but and then each of you will do your presentation. And then May the 6th, which is next Thursday night a week, that's when these other pieces are due: the title page, table of contents, abstract, and references. Again, you can submit all of your paper in draft if you want to, and those will be the pieces that I grade. Again, if you don't want feedback, or if you're swamped because of other things going on in your life, you've got a couple of other classes that are really kicking you right now that you need to spend some time with, again, you can hold off and just submit one final paper by May the 13th. But whatever you submit in that final submission for May the 13th, that locks in the grade. And if I don't have anything for some of those earlier submissions, that's where I'll go back and give you grades for those earlier submissions. Is that helpful?
Yep.
Okay. Any comments from anybody, or any questions or confusion? And I understand if you don't want to talk in front of the group, just send me an email and we can follow up that way. But I did try to reply to everybody that sent me something over the last couple of days. If I haven't graded your material by right now, I'll probably grade another 2 or 3 tonight. And then I will be finished by this time tomorrow afternoon. Okay. Okay, well, folks, again, if you don't have any other questions, I won't keep you. And let me stop sharing. And so until next Tuesday night, when I see you in class, good luck with your work. And again, if you have any questions about what you're working on or your submission, please let me know. Thank you.